Directors are the creative leads of the film. They hold the creative vision throughout the whole process, from pre-production through the final edit. Hello, my name is Emmett, and today we'll be looking into the industry that is film, how it has changed and developed, and how it has been affected by and how it has both affected directors, contemporary and historic. Directors in themselves are the ones whose creative vision is brought into screen through the various other roles within the pre-production and post-production lifestyle. They will work with various other people and roles on the production cycle, such as the director of photography, who will frame the entire shots in the style of the director's vision. Next is the various assistant directors with whom the production itself would be in chaos without. The production designers are the ones who build and manifest the visual idea of the director onto the physical landscape of the set, creating things like sets and moulding the land to their director's vision. Then finally, you have the managerial roles such as producers who will get funding to make sure the overall production flow goes smoothly, and the casting director who, alongside the director, will choose the correct people for the roles within the film itself. An example of one of the long-standing directors of our period would be Martin Scorsese, director of such films as Goodfellas and Shutter Island. This man alone has created various long-standing films that still grace our screens till this day, allowing up-and-coming directors to learn from his wealth of knowledge through various documentaries, his work, and interviews. So many people constantly ask, how did the film industry even start? Who created film and cinema? Well, to begin, no one person created the film or cinema in the beginning. Cameras themselves had existed since 1816, but it wasn't until the year of 1891 that someone finally decided to create the first piece of technology that allowed someone to view a sequence of moving images in a row. That man was Thomas Edison. In 1891, he created what is known as the grandfather to modern film, the kinetoscope, which was a camera modified to allow a single person at a time to view a sequence of moving images. It wasn't until 1958 that a pair of brothers, known as the Lumiere brothers, would present this in a form that allowed multiple people to view a sequence of moving pictures at once. This is through their creation of an iconic piece of technology called the cinematograph, which is a camera, projector, and film printer all in one, which you then would use to show films to various large groups of people. Their films didn't run longer than a few minutes, or even less in a lot of the cases, but allowed them to then show these films in much larger places to much larger groups of people, such as music halls or parks. These films, however, weren't the original silent films, as they were often accompanied by some sort of music, lecture, or audience participation to keep the audience engaged throughout. The first of these that were produced and actually shown publicly was their originally titled Workers Leaving the Lumiere Factory in 1985, running no longer than a couple seconds. By the close of the 19th century, filmmakers decided to really experiment with the possibilities that could be created with the medium of film itself. Technological innovations during that time would then allow legendary filmmaker George Méliès to experiment with the first instance of special effects in a film, with his film in 1902, A Trip to the Moon, which saw the face of the moon with an embedded rocket in it, shocking onlookers as they wondered how the effect was done, and created a marvel and still stands to this day as an iconic piece of cinema, which was just revolutionary. By the time 1904 came around, the Nickelodeon craze had taken America by storm. It was a selection of short films around the time, dubbed so because it only cost a single nickel to view one. Around 9,000 of these had appeared throughout the United States, converting storefronts into these faux cinema screens in order to show them to the general masses, no more than a handful of people at a time usually. This was actually the first instance in which film was being created for the general populace, rather than being created for onlookers and thinkers and whatever great minds existed of the time. Demand continued to grow around 1910, which then led to various outbreaks of controversy around who actually would own these films and who would own the said rights and distribution for these. This brought about the sprouting of patent companies. Companies whose sole existence was to decide and mark down who had the distribution and viewing rights of these said pieces or Nickelodeons. The most well-known and used company at that time was the Motion Pictures Patents Company, often shortened to MPPC. In the year of 1908, it was actually founded and owned by the same Thomas Edison who had brought the idea of film to the world. Then, in the year of 1912, one of the first proper feature films was released. The film was known as Queen Elizabeth by directors Louis Mercantin and Harry de Fontaine, which was created in Europe due to the boom in popularity of the Nickelodeons in America. So Europe decided to create more of a story-based and longer form content. The system was put in place to create these mass-produced and easily shot films in studios, creating these basic and relatable films for the mass public in America. It was even stated that as of the year 1915, 60% of the US film production was centered in Hollywood in this studio-style system. As popularity in films increased, this then gave rise to the concept of production companies. These were companies who would produce these films for the big screen, or as we now know, features. The Hollywood film production companies were dominated by 8 studios, just 8, which was then broken up into the 5 major and 3 minor companies at the time. These were created by men such as Samuel Goldwyn Mayer, who owned his own company in Lowe's. The 5 major players in the ring were the Fox Film Corporation, which then went on to become 20th Century Fox, as we know today, a titan in our current cinemascape. Warner Bros., who are another very active company, even going by the same name these days. RKO, the only one of the 5 who actually went defunct in 1959, and now most of their library is actually owned and distributed by Warner Bros. And finally, as mentioned prior, Lowe's, which actually went on to become Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, one of the biggest companies in our current cinemascape, which released such films as The Wizard of Oz in 1923, a huge film by any standard. These companies owned the majority of the studios, lots, equipment, and even contracts with the crew and directors that they would employ. These titans would rule well into the late 20s and 50s, even outside of America. Now, the 3 smaller companies consisted of Universal, Columbia, and the United Arts. These were much less prevalent, but would stand out due to factors like United Arts being structured as more of a banker/distributor for smaller independent producers. The golden age of Hollywood cinema would then start with the release of the first long-running feature talkie film, so a film that was no longer silent. In 1922, The Jazz Singer was released, which elevated Warner Brothers to being one of the biggest studios not only in America, but worldwide. Films would then go from being silent and monochromatic, black and white, to sound then being introduced, and the field would become dominated by directing lacking sound engineers due to the current directors having a lack of experience working with sound, and them relying a lot on how the sound would have to be shot and recorded. So the engineers would actually get a lot of say and could change anything on set if it meant that they could actually record the sound that the director wanted, thus giving them a lot of power in the studio. We would then see directors such as Cecil B. DeMille moving away from their monochromatic films, and in 1923 he would release The 10 Commandments, using a 2-strip Technicolor process to add a few colours to his films, not too many, usually yellows, reds, greens, creating a sense of connection and life to the characters and set pieces. Then, in 1949, he would go on to create one of his most revolutionary pieces, Samson and Delilah. Revolutionary due to its inclusion of both colour and sound purely from a directorial standpoint. Once again, directors have regained control of films. DeMille had his film distributed by Paramount Pictures, one of the smaller of the main 8, but still managed to create these overwhelming pieces for the audience due to the use of newer technologies, as mentioned earlier, the 2-strip Technicolor process, to create these overwhelming marvels within his films, in these epics that he would create. DeMille himself didn't actually start as a director, he started as a playwright, which then led him on to his passion for creating moving pieces. He took his knowledge from his previous field, knowing how to adapt stories from previous works such as the aforementioned 10 Commandments, which he then later recreated in 1956 to include a much better colouring processes, which added a dreamlike quality to the film, as mentioned by audiences at the time. Famed director Martin Scorsese in his film A Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese Through American Movies in 1995 stated that DeMille created a sophisticated art form from film. He's an example of how directors weren't growing up expecting to become directors during his time. They would primarily come from other backgrounds, be it technical, such as, set designers, production designers, or even creative, such as with DeMille himself, being a playwright. He would create these pieces that would have much more mass appeal to them, creating stories around things like religion and characters whom people at the time could relate to, as audiences at the time couldn't really handle anything harder. Then we move on to a more contemporary example of directing, a director who is still going even till this day. Quentin Tarantino started off as wanting to be both a writer and director, contrasting entirely Cecil DeMille. Quentin Tarantino started off as wanting to become a director and writer, both contrasting but also paralleling DeMille's humble beginnings as a playwright. Tarantino himself is even quoted as saying, "People ask if I went to film school. I tell them, no, I went to films." He started his career off by creating a script for his soon-to-be well-known film Reservoir Dogs in 1992, which he then gave to his acting teacher at the time, Harvey Keitel, who liked it enough to help him get $1.5 million to fund the film, both the acting, casting, and the film production itself. This film was then screened at the Sundance Film Festival in 1992, to which he described the screening as, "That was a disaster." That's kind of famous actually. This is due to him not having experienced people seeing his work at all. So he would constantly go over in his head what he would have done different, how he would have shot this better, and how he could have done everything much better. It was also a disaster due to the various technical difficulty faults that they had throughout the screening, from having the lights come on too early to having the power cut out entirely during the final climactic scene of the film. Tarantino stated himself that he is a fan of both directors and films individually, paying multiple homages in his first film, such as to the 1956 noir film The Killing by Stanley Kubrick. He is considered an artist with the camera, pioneering such techniques such as the trunk shot, a low-angled shot from within a car trunk where the camera is looking up at the main source of the scene, usually including some banter back and forth between two characters, usually surrounding what is in the trunk. As time's gone by, Tarantino's films have only gotten bigger in scale, but have still stayed grounded in their character-based narrative due to his storytelling style. This allows people to continue to relate to these characters within these films, as Tarantino has mastered the art of creating these relatable characters that makes the audience stick to the screen in anticipation as to what will happen to these characters and how the story will turn out. This is only heightened by his heavy use of two shots within his films, framing conversations as if you the viewer were actually in the scene with the characters. When we look at both of these iconic directors side by side, we can see that both of these directors differ in their core styles of shooting and storytelling. DeMille makes these epic spectacles for the screen, whereas Tarantino likes to create these more focused and grounded storytelling narratives, which are much more in common with today's cinemascape than DeMille's epics. As time gone by, DeMille realized the epics he would create would cost more and more to create due to the equipment, time, and manpower would cost and need for locational shooting, even then becoming more common in today's cinemascape, such as with Shawn Mendes' 1917. Tarantino still keeps his films a lot more grounded and narrative and character driven, rather than creating these big epic spectacles, in a more grounded and focused shooting style. Despite both of the directors' styles differing so much, they actually have a lot of overlap, such as how they frame their characters in their more somber scenes within their films. Due to the development in shooting technology, Tarantino can actually do this a lot more effectively, due to the ease of access of equipment such as better lenses for close-ups and access to depth of field within his shots, which he uses extensively to great effect. The industry at the time had moved on, and despite DeMille ultimately changing with the times, he didn't live on to see how the industry had developed for people like Tarantino to carry on his creation of these think pieces. The role of the director has become a lot more of a focused one. Due to the betterment of technology, they can now focus primarily on how it is represented and leave things like editing and set building to their fellow crew. As time has gone on, directing has only become easier due to the emerging technology of our current time. Things such as pre-rendering scenes, such as with the Unreal Engine, and even special effects have made it a lot easier for directors to see how their vision will turn out before they actually go and shoot these scenes. However, directors of this time have to be constantly aware of changing times and views around them. They must take a slower approach to storytelling and what the audience themselves will think about the final product and the points, characters, narratives within them. DeMille, however, did not have this problem due to the more narrow-minded thinking of the time. A director like Tarantino will constantly have to be aware how people will react to specific things that he shows on screen, such as with how something at the time may not be as offensive, but it just may be considered offensive by the time that the film actually comes out, or even just by the time the film is shot. Despite this, technology will only continue to grow and develop throughout our time, eventually leading to a camera that can shoot any sort without having to change lenses, settings. It can do everything automatically. You wouldn't have to change ISO, aperture, shutter speed, white balance. You wouldn't have to change any of that. Current directors can be pigeonholed into specific genres and tropes actually, but despite this, examples such as The Avengers in 2012 by Joss Whedon have shown that directors can actually create their own new entire blueprint for films, which we can now see with the overabundance of Marvel films in Hollywood. Directors and writers are threatened by technology now more than ever, with things such as AI being able to create and concept a script for a feature film has made the role of the director a much more volatile role within the ever-expanding mediascape. Even in 2023, we had the entirety of the Writers Guild of America striking due to ever-increasing use of AI within the industry, and the fact that they aren't even getting paid enough to make a working wage. However, they emerged victorious in the battle in more recent days, which I think is a big step forward in the right direction. All in all, directors have changed a lot throughout the time they've been around. They've been constantly adapting to and changing to various new technologies, roles in the process, and even the change in view within the audience that they are creating their films for. But despite that, directors have remained resilient to whatever will be thrown at them. From Cecil DeMille to Quentin Tarantino to even local small directors, they're all focused on bringing their ideas to life to show the world what man can truly create. Thank you for watching this piece, and goodbye.